Hello everyone, welcome to Literature Insights. I hope you all are doing well. This is part 2 of our chronology questions. In this video, we will discuss some more chronology questions of the year 2023. So without wasting any time, let's get straight into the video. Question number 1 is, find the chronological order of Thomas Hardy's poetry publications. Our options are Channel Firing, The Darkling Thrush, In Time of the Breaking of Nations, He Never Expected Much, and A Tramp Woman's Tragedy. Let's first talk about each option and then we can arrange them chronologically. Our first option is Channel Firing. This poem was published in May 1914, just 3 months before the beginning of First World War. The poem begins like, "That night your great guns unawares shook all our coffins as we lay and broke the chancel window squares. We thought it was the judgment day." Our next option is The Darkling Thrush. The Darkling Thrush is a poem which is originally titled By the Century's Deathbed. This poem was first published in the year 1900 in the weekly newspaper The Graphic. The poem begins like, "I leaned upon a coppice gate when frost was spectre grey, and winter's dregs made desolate the weakening eye of day." Our third option is In Time of the Breaking of Nations. This poem was written in the year 1915 and published in the Saturday Review in 1916. The title of this poem is a quotation from the Old Testament of the Bible. The poem begins like, "Only a man harrowing clothes in a slow silent walk, with an old horse that stumbles and nods, half asleep as they stalk." Our next option is He Never Expected Much. This is a poem by Hardy which was published in the year 1928 after the poet's death. It is written from the perspective of an old man who looks back on his life and the decisions that he has made. The poem begins like, "Well, world, you have kept faith with me, kept faith with me. Upon the whole you have proved to be much as you said you were." This poem was published in Hardy's final posthumous collection, which is called Winter Words in Various Moods and Meters. Our last option is A Tramp Woman's Tragedy. This is a 1903 narrative poem in 104 lines by Hardy. The poem begins like, "From Vineyard's Gap the livelong day, we beat afoot the northward way we had travelled times before." Now let's arrange all the options chronologically. The first one would be The Darkling Thrush, which came in the year 1900. Then we have A Tramp Woman's Tragedy, which came in the year 1903, followed by Channel Firing, which came in the year 1914. Then In Times of Breaking of Nations, which came in the year 1916. And the last is He Never Expected Much, which came in the year 1928. Let's move on to the next question. Arrange the chronological sequence in which the following works were published. Our options are Reflections on the Revolution in France, Preface to Shakespeare, The Social Contract, Treatise on Human Nature, and Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding. Let's talk about each option first and then we will arrange them chronologically. Our first option is Reflections on the Revolution in France. It is a political pamphlet written by Edmund Burke and published in 1790. Burke in this political pamphlet criticizes the French Revolution and its radical ideas. He argues for the preservation of traditional institutions and wants gradual reform instead of violent upheaval. Later, in 1791, Thomas Paine came with a work called Rights of Man, and he dedicated that work to George Washington, but this work was a reply to the conservative attack on the French Revolution made by the British politician Edmund Burke in his work Reflections on the Revolution in France. So basically, in 1790, what happened was Edmund Burke, he criticized French Revolution in his work Reflections on the Revolution in France, which came in 1790. But in 1791, Thomas Paine came with a work called Rights of Man, in which he defended French Revolution. Our next option is Preface to Shakespeare. The preface to Shakespeare came in the year 1765. In Preface to Shakespeare, Dr. Johnson lays down a historical understanding of Shakespeare. He weighs Shakespeare's achievements against his faults. He praises him for a just representation of general nature. Johnson justifies his violation of unities and the use of tragicomedy. According to Dr. Johnson, Shakespeare's major faults are lack of moral purpose, the fondness for puns and gross jokes, which he called his fatal Cleopatra, the use of Shakespeare's tendency to use ornate and pompous diction, Shakespeare's carelessness in creating plots, and the use of anachronisms. Our third option is The Social Contract. It is a 1762 French language book by the Genevan philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau. This book was originally published as On the Social Contract or Principles of Political Right. Jean-Jacques Rousseau's The Social Contract says that people are free when they live by the rules they make together. He believed that a good government should represent the general will or common good of all citizens. This way, everyone follows fair laws, helping society stay equal and peaceful. Our next option is A Treatise of Human Nature. The full title is A Treatise of Human Nature, being an attempt to introduce the experimental method of reasoning into moral subjects. This is a book by Scottish philosopher David Hume and published between the years 1739 and 40. This book is divided into three parts. First is Of the Understanding, second is Of the Passions, and third is Of Morals. Our last option is An Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding. This is also a work by the Scottish philosopher David Hume, published in the year 1748 under the title Philosophical Essays Concerning Human Understanding. This work is basically a revision of his previous work, which was called A Treatise of Human Nature. Hume was disappointed with the reception of the treatise because that was not well received by the press, so he decided to disseminate his more developed ideas to the public by writing a shorter and more polemical work, which he called The Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding. Now let's arrange the options chronologically. The first one would be Treatise on Human Nature, which came in the year 1739 and 40. Then we have An Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding coming in the year 1748. After that, we have The Social Contract by Rousseau coming in the year 1762, followed by The Preface to Shakespeare, which came in the year 1765, and finally we have Reflections on the Revolution in France, which came in the year 1790. Let's move on to the next question now. Arrange the following novels in chronological order of publication. Our options are Jude the Obscure, Tess of the D'Urbervilles, Under the Greenwood Tree, A Pair of Blue Eyes, and Far from the Madding Crowd. Let's talk about each option first. Our first option is Jude the Obscure. Jude the Obscure is Hardy's last work of fiction and also is one of the most gloomily fatalistic novels. Here, Hardy is depicting the lives of individuals who are trapped by the forces beyond their control. There is this character called Jude Foley who is a poor villager and he wants to enter the University of Christminster. But he is, tricked by a girl called Arabella Dawn who tells him that she is pregnant by him. So, what happens is Jude has to marry her, but their relationship does not work. Jude earns a living as a stonemason at Christminster, and there he falls in love with his independent minded cousin who is called Sue Bridehead. But out of a sense of obligation, Sue has to marry the schoolmaster Philoston, who has helped her, but she is unable to live with him. So, what happens is she returns to live with Jude and eventually bears his children out of wedlock. But society highly disapproves their relationship, so their poverty and the weight of society's disapproval, it begins to take a toll on Sue and Jude, and the climax occurs when Jude's son by Arabella hangs Sue and Jude's children and himself. The children die, and so does Little Time, Jude's son with Arabella. So, in penance, what happens is Sue returns to Philoston and the church, and Jude returns to Arabella but eventually dies miserably. So, this is the story of Jude the Obscure. Jude the Obscure was first published in 1894 and 5 in an abridged form in Harper's New Monthly as first The Simpletons and later as Heart's Insurgent. It was later in 1895 that it was published in book form as Jude the Obscure. Our next option is Tess of the D'Urbervilles. The subtitle of this novel is also important, which is A Pure Woman Faithfully Presented. This is a novel by Hardy which initially appeared in a censored and serialized version in a British illustrated newspaper called The Graphic in the year 1891. Then, in the same year, that is 1891, this novel was published in the book form. This novel is set in an impoverished rural England, which is Hardy's fictional Wessex. This novel by Hardy is divided into 7 phases. Phase the first is The Maiden. Phase the second is Maiden No More. Phase the third is The Rally. Phase the fourth is The Consequence. Phase the fifth is The Woman Pays. Phase the sixth is The Convert. Phase the seventh is The Fulfillment. Now let's talk about the story of Tess also. Tess of the D'Urbervilles tells the tragic story of Tess Durbeyfield, a poor but kind-hearted girl from a rural village in England. One day, her family discovers that they are descendants of the noble D'Urberville family. Hoping to improve their fortunes, they send Tess to seek help from the wealthy D'Urbervilles. And there she meets Alec D'Urberville, who deceives and takes advantage of her. Heartbroken, Tess returns home and later gives birth to Alec's child, who soon dies. Now she is determined to start over. Tess finds work at a dairy farm where she meets Angel Clare, a kind and idealistic man. They both fall in love and get married. However, on their wedding night, Tess confesses her past, and Angel, unable to forgive her, leaves her and goes. Alone and struggling, Tess eventually ends up back with Alec out of desperation. Angel finally realizes his mistake and returns to find Tess, and in a moment of despair, Tess kills Alec. She briefly escapes with Angel but is captured and executed. The story thus shows Tess as a victim of fate, society's harsh judgments, and the cruelty of men. The story also highlights the injustices faced by women in a strict, unforgiving world. Let's talk about our other option, which is Under the Greenwood Tree. The full title is Under the Greenwood Tree, a rural painting of the Dutch school. It is a novel by Hardy, which was published anonymously in the year 1872. This novel was Hardy's second published novel and the first of his Wessex novels. Under the Greenwood Tree is a pastoral novel that centers around the lives of people in the small village of Mellstock. The story mainly focuses on the love lives of two characters, Fancy Day and Dick Dewey. The story takes place in a rural village where Fancy Day is a young, attractive school teacher who catches the eye of many men, including Dick Dewey, a kind and hardworking young man. Fancy is initially attracted to Dick, but she is also courted by Parson Maybold, a more refined and wealthy man. Although Fancy is tempted by Maybold's status, she feels a stronger connection with Dick, but she struggles with making a decision. Throughout the novel, we can see that there's a lot of talk about social class, love, and relationships as the village folk gossip about Fancy's choices. And in the end, we see that Fancy and Dick end up together as she chooses the genuine love they share over the more prestigious match with Maybold. Now in the story, we have talked about three characters, which are Dick Dewey, Fancy Day and Maybold. Let me tell you about the other characters also. The other characters are Robert Penny, Reuben Dewey, William Dewey, Geoffrey Day and Frederick Shiner. Some additional details about this novel. This book was originally to be called The Mellstock Choir, but during the summer of 1871, Hardy added some significant additional material, and with the new structure came a new title which was called Under the Greenwood Tree, which is taken from a song in Shakespeare's As You Like It. Our next option is A Pair of Blue Eyes. It's a novel by Hardy which was first serialized in a magazine called Tinsley and was published in a book form in 1873. It was Hardy's third published novel and the first not published anonymously. A Pair of Blue Eyes by Hardy tells the story of a young woman named Elfride Swancourt and her romantic entanglements. Elfride is a beautiful, intelligent young woman who lives with her father, the vicar of a small rural parish. She meets Stephen Smith, a poor young architect, and they form a romantic connection. Stephen is deeply in love with Elfride, but because of their different social classes, as he is poor and she is well off, they face challenges in their relationship. Later, Elfride becomes involved with Henry Knight, an older wealthy man who is initially captivated by her, but he is not as open to the idea of marriage. But as the story unfolds, we see that Elfride's feelings for Stephen and Henry lead her to make difficult decisions. She is torn between love and social expectations. So what she does is, she, out of desperation, marries a third man who's called Lord Luxellian. Now some additional details about this novel. This was the third of Hardy's novel to be published and the first to bear his name. It was first serialized in Tinsley magazine, as I told you before. This novel is notable for the strong parallels to Hardy and his first wife, Emma Gifford. In fact, of Hardy's early novels, this is probably the most densely populated with autobiographical events. Our last option is Far from the Madding Crowd. It is a novel by Hardy, which is his first major literary success and his fourth published novel. It came in the year 1874. It originally appeared anonymously as a monthly serial in Cornhill magazine, where it gained a wide readership. Now, since I'm telling you about the magazines, the novels were serialized first in, so keep the magazines in your mind since they might be important for you. And then we see that this novel, Far from the Madding Crowd, is set in Thomas Hardy's Wessex in rural southwest England. This story by Hardy is a story about love, heartbreak, and fate set in the rural English countryside. The story centers around Bathsheba Everdeen, an independent and beautiful young woman. She inherits her uncle's farm and becomes a successful farmer in her own right. Bathsheba attracts the attention of three very different men. First is Gabriel Oak. He is a humble and hardworking shepherd who falls in love with her. He later becomes her farm manager after losing his own job. Then the other man is William Boldwood. He is a wealthy older farmer who becomes obsessed with Bathsheba after she flirts with him. And the third is Sergeant Troy. He is a charming man but a reckless soldier. He is a charming man but a reckless soldier who Bathsheba falls in love with and marries despite his poor character. Bathsheba's marriage to Troy is troubled as he is unfaithful and irresponsible. Meanwhile, we see that Gabriel remains loyal to her, helping her manage the farm through difficult times. But tragedy strikes when Troy dies, and Bathsheba realizes that she truly loves Gabriel. And after a lot of emotional turmoil and misunderstandings, we see that Bathsheba and Gabriel eventually marry and find happiness together. Thus, the novel explores themes of love, pride, loyalty, and the consequences of choices with a focus on rural life and social expectations in the Victorian era. Some additional details about this novel. Hardy took the title Far from the Madding Crowd from Thomas Gray's very famous poem, which is Elegy written in a country churchyard. And in the year 1879, Hardy adapted the novel under the title The Mistress of the Farm, a pastoral drama. Okay, so now let's arrange the options chronologically. The first one would be Under the Greenwood Tree, coming in the year 1872, followed by A Pair of Blue Eyes, coming in the year 1873, followed by Far from the Madding Crowd, coming in the year 1874. Then we have Tess of the D'Urbervilles, coming in the year 1891, followed by Jude the Obscure, coming in the year 1895. Let's move on to our next question. Find the chronological sequence of John Milton's publications. Our options are Paradise Lost, Lycidas, On the Morning of Christ's Nativity, On Shakespeare, and Paradise Regained. Let's first talk about each option and then we will arrange them chronologically. First option is Paradise Lost. Paradise Lost is an epic poem in blank verse by Milton. The first version of this poem was published in 1667, which consisted of 10 books. Then, later, a second edition followed in 1674, and the 10 books were rearranged into 12 books. The subject of Paradise Lost is the fall of man, where Milton is attempting to justify the ways of God to men. The epic begins like, Of man's first disobedience and the fruit of that forbidden tree, whose mortal taste brought death into the world, and all our woe, with the loss of Eden till one greater man, restore us and regain the blissful seat. The epic Paradise Lost was originally conceived as a tragedy called Adam Unparadised. The poem concerns the biblical story of the fall of man, the temptation of Adam and Eve by the fallen angel Satan, and their expulsion from the Garden of Eden. Let me tell you some additional details about the Paradise Lost. In Paradise Lost, Book 7 is the shortest book and Book 9 is the longest book. In Book 12, Adam is depicting the fall as inevitable and partly fortunate, calling it Felix culpa or fortunate mistake. Dryden, in his dedication to the Aeneid, which he translated in 1697, is the first to say that Satan is the real hero of Paradise Lost. Dryden also calls Milton the poetical son of Spenser in preface to the Fables. The writer William Blake says, Milton was a true poet and of the devil's party without knowing it. He says this in The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. And one more important thing, in the year 1967, a book came, Surprised by Sin, The Reader in Paradise Lost. It's a book by reader response critic Stanley Fish, where he argues that the reader is the real hero in Paradise Lost. Our next option is Lycidas. It's a poem by Milton written in 1637 as a pastoral elegy. Milton wrote this poem in dedication to his friend Edward King. He was a friend of Milton at Cambridge. He drowned in the Irish Sea. The poem Lycidas is termed a monody or a lament by one person, but along with the main narrator, who is an uncouth shepherd, Phoebus, the river Camus, and Saint Peter, they also appear to speak. Another important thing about the poem Lycidas is that Dr. Johnson criticized Lycidas for the inherent improbability of its pastoral convention. Our next option is On the Morning of Christ's Nativity. It's a nativity ode written by Milton in 1629 and published in his Poems of Mr. John Milton in 1645. The poem describes Christ's incarnation and his overthrow of earthly and pagan powers. The poem also connects the incarnation with Christ's crucifixion. Our next option is On Shakespeare. It was Milton's first published poem, which appeared anonymously in the second folio of plays by Shakespeare in the year 1632, and there it bears the title An Epitaph on the Admirable Dramatic Poet W. Shakespeare. Our last option is Paradise Regained. Paradise Regained is a poem by Milton, published in the year 1671, along with Milton's closet drama Samson Agonistes. Paradise Regained is based on Gospel of Luke. The theme it follows is of temptation, where the protagonist is Son of God. In the plot of Paradise Regained, we see that in the wilderness, Satan tempts Jesus to follow the worldly path with all its accompanying splendors, but Jesus resists Satan's temptation and regains the paradise lost by Adam and Eve. Hence, by avoiding temptations of a public life, Jesus remains a private man and submits himself patiently and quietly to God's purpose. Paradise Regained is 4 books long and has been called a brief epic by an academic called Barbara. Let's arrange the options in chronological order. The first one would be On Shakespeare, coming in the year 1632, followed by Lycidas, coming in the year 1637, followed by On the Morning of Christ's Nativity, which was written in the year 1629 but was published in the Milton's poem in 1645, followed by Paradise Lost in 1667, and then we have Paradise Regained 1671. Let's move on to our next question. Arrange in chronological order the publication of the following anthologies of poetry by Nissim Ezekiel. Our options are The Exact Name, Latter-day Psalms, 60 Poems, The Unfinished Man, and A Time to Change. For this question, I am sharing a code with you, and with the help of this code, you have to answer this question in the comments below. So, Nissim Ezekiel is telling us that it is time to change. And how will the time change? By writing 60 poems on the discovery of India, where the third unfinished man has the exact name. And what is the name? The name is snakeskin. And when do snakes come out? They come out in darkness. So hymns in darkness, and in the darkness what do? We wait for the day to dawn. So latter day psalms, and in the end we have the collected poems. I know the code that I've given you is very lame, but it will help you remember all the anthologies by Ezekiel. So take its help as much as you can. Okay. So I'm repeating the code once again. Nissim Ezekiel is telling us that it is time to change. But how will the time change? The time will change by writing 60 poems on the discovery of India, where the third unfinished man has the exact name as snakeskin. And when do snakes come out? They come out in darkness. And then what do? We wait for the day to dawn. So later day psalms, and then at the end we have collected poems. So now that I have shared the code with you, I want you all to answer this question in the comments below. And no cheating, stay away from Wikipedia, okay? Just be honest and use the code that I have given to you. And whoever gets it right will get a shout out in my next video. I know the code might sound a bit silly to you, but trust me, it will help you remember Nissim Ezekiel's work in a better way, okay? So good luck! And don't go anywhere because there are still a lot of chronology questions left from the 2023 PYQs. But I assure you that I'll be covering them all in my further videos. So stay tuned for that. Thank you very much for watching.